Thanks for tuning in to Season 4 of Strange, Rare, and Peculiar Homeopathy Podcast, where homeopathy lives, breathes, and evolves with Denise Straiges and Alastair Gray. We'll be exploring modern practice, research, and philosophy, from Hahnemann's radical insights to today's breakthroughs and discoveries. Get ready for homeopathy woes, feedback from pros, and the more you knows.
Let's go. Yo, folks.
Yeah.
How you doing? It is a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good evening from myself, Alastair Gray. I am the Academic Director at the Academy of Homeopathy Education, also the Research Director at Home Foundation / the Institute for the Advancement of Homeopathy.
You almost forgot, didn't you? You forgot what it was called.
AIH, IHA,
I know.
AHI, whatever.
Acronym soup. I am Denise Straiges, and I have the luckiest job in the world. Maybe luckiest job? No, I'm the luckiest person in the world to have the best job ever. I'm the president and clinical director of the Academy of Homeopathy Education and the Institute for the Advancement of Homeopathy. We are a not-for-profit initiative completely dedicated to bringing homeopathy back to its rightful place in medicine through education, through research, through access to clinical services, and bringing information out to the people with our podcast. So thanks for being here. This is our 120th episode.
120th?
Yes.
That's crazy town.
I know. Thank you all for being here. Please like and subscribe and do all those things. We're getting some traction. Today, our topic is, what the hell is homeopathy? We need to have a talk about this, people. We need to discuss what it is and what it isn't, and then really think about what we do going forward, because it's like this incredible thing, and we want to give it its due. If we're going to bring homeopathy back to its rightful place, well, we need to know, what the hell is it? All right. So that's our topic. Before we begin, we got a quick note. We are enrolling for fall here at the Academy of Homeopathy Education. And so we've got events coming up for people who want to learn more about it. We are a boutique school. We're not a giant for-profit institution. We are bringing up the next generation of leadership in homeopathy with really incredible, deep teaching, lots of one-to-one mentorship. Our graduates actually practice. They go on to be successful, to earn a living as homeopaths. So if you would like to join us to learn more about AHE, we have a few spots still available. We enroll 2 cohorts every year, one that's a 4-year track and one that's a 2-year track. And so you'll find all the details and registration links for the upcoming events in the show notes. And if you have a question that you would like us to answer on a future episode, leave us a comment. We read all of them.
Well, look, I wanted to read this to you because I thought it was awesome, because I've got my own fan mail. I've been listening to you and Denise on the SRP podcast. I just lost it here. Hang on, where's the mail? Okay. From beginning to end. So in other words, by the sounds of it, this person here is
119 episodes in.
19 deep. Your information is both stirring and informative. I like that. Stirring.
Yeah.
Look at this. I'm an electrician of 20 years now, and I've recently discovered homeopathy, and it's piqued my interest. I'm interested in learning much more. Where do I buy your books? All right. And then that rest of that email went on to, how do I find your books? And then I got a follow-up, and it said, this is a couple of days later, bought the books from Dana's site, and Dana is selling them for more than I am. Great work in homeopathy education. I will keep furthering my research into homeopathy and perhaps one day make a career change. But for now, I'm putting the puzzle pieces together until I get a clear picture. I'm on the right path. Currently studying the 6th edition of the Organon. You and Denise, take care, and thanks for the positive education you're doing. And I just love that from a million different points of view, but most importantly, an electrician on the 6th edition of the Organon. What do you think?
I know. Well, that's better than some of the homeopaths that I've been dealing with that are trying to push anything as a definition of homeopathy. Oi.
Oh.
So that's why we're talking about what the hell is homeopathy. And it's interesting because we had our first day off. We finished teaching like a week ago. We missed it dropping an episode because we finished teaching. We went right into our team retreat.
Yeah.
We had everybody here for a week and we had graduation and we had 3 days of events. It was so much fun. We had a trip to the archives. We try to take our students there every year. It's like my second home. Then students went to the Mutter Museum, which is kind of a medical oddities museum, which is one of my favorite places. I love.
Well,
And then,
medical oddities, give us an example.
oh, like Siamese twins in a jar, that sort of thing.
Oh, these twins
Yeah.
in a jar. That's
I don't know if they still have that. They had that, but they've really come up to speed with 21st century conversations about ethics in lack of consent for people's Siamese twins being put in a jar. So I think it's really interesting that they've included that in their exhibits. Anyway, and then on Saturday night, the night before graduation, we had what was, I think, the most fun event, happy hour with Harry. And so we've been known to visit Constantine Herring's grave with some alarming regularity. Actually, we've been there I think four times. The first time we went, our dear friend Tanya Kell was here. She's the president of NASH, the North American Society of Homeopaths. And so she was at our house and we were doing what homeopaths do. We were like talking about herring or whatever and talking about Philly homeopathy. And then it occurred to me that it was sometime in high summer. And I remembered that Herring died in the summertime. And I looked to see the date that he died. It was that day. Do you remember? I think it's July 28th.
So we jumped in the car and then what happened?
So we went but then we couldn't find him. It's a beautiful cemetery where he is. So we like went walking all around. We saw these deer. We had a great time. We finally found Herring. And it's interesting because Herring's grave, we'll post some pictures of it. We've got a lot of pictures actually of it, but his grave, there's like a little sort of grave plaque, I guess you would say. It's sort of a flat stone. And then engraved on the front, it says Herring, but a tree has grown basically through it. So you could see that it's sort of disrupted by the root network. And Herring is buried with his family members. So there are other Herrings and then the Nur family. So was Calvin Nur's gravesite there?
Yeah.
He's the nephew. No, he's the son-in-law.
The son-in-law.
Son-in-law. Calvin Nur married Herring's daughter. He's the one who wrote The Life of Herring.
Very good.
I have it right here. Anyway, okay. So, but then there was a new stone for Herring, and it's quite a big one. And it's obviously not from the same time period. So Herring lived from 1800. Wasn't he born the 1st of January, 1800?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's quite auspicious. Melanie also born in 1800, but Herring lived to 1880.
And so was...
That's 80 years.
Yeah. I'm going to say J-A-H-R. Yeah, whatever. It's 3.
Anyway, so yeah, and so then there's this big, there was a new headstone. Anyway, the point I wanted to make is that we don't really know if his body was moved because there are all these roots underneath. So like, I wonder, did they move his grave, the actual grave to where the new stone is, or just memorialized with a new stone? If anybody knows,
yeah,
I'm sure we could find it online or probably by calling the cemetery. Anyway, that same day we decided if we went to see Herring, we couldn't not go see Lippe. And so we then went to find Lippe's grave. And unfortunately, he's not in the garden spot. I mean,
he's not in the fancy pants cemetery. No. He is, as it turns out, I'm going to say in the lower grade West Philly cemetery.
No, it's not. I'd say it's in North Philadelphia. We spent quite a bit of time in like this blazing afternoon heat in this pretty derelict chain link fence surrounded cemetery that's near a place where people throw away old tires. It was like in that sort of a vibe. And we couldn't find him. And Al and Tanya and I were walking. We separated and we're walking. And then a police van came, like a SWAT truck. And they're like, excuse me, what are you doing here? And anyway, we found Lippe. So he's across the street. And actually, he's in this little sort of alcove area that's actually quite beautiful. Not really an alcove, but like in the corner, but behind some houses. And there's a beautiful fruit tree, maybe an apple tree or something above him.
Yeah, it did
Right?
see your story there because I remember it slightly differently.
Do you?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it an alcove. It's definitely an oak tree, but you're right about it. It's quite lovely, and it's in that corner by the road that divides the cemetery with all the tires. That was quite a day.
Yeah. I'm looking to see if I can find it, if we remember what year it was. I would say it's probably 2021.
COVID adjacent, I think it's probably one. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, part of why that this is compelling is, look, do you realize that we've been in this together over 70 years?
Doing homeopathy?
Yeah.
Correct. 70
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. We've passed the 70-year mark anyway, but I think even with that amount of time, and it's not just about time, right? It's about the hours in the chair. The more we do this, I think the more questions we have. And so we tend to ask the questions, try to find an answer for the things that we are wondering about. So on our very first day off after the school year, we went to the archives. And so this past Wednesday, we went and we spent the better part of a day asking questions about homeopathy, we can hopefully not make the same mistakes twice. And so we learn from history, that expression, history repeats itself. I don't think we want history to repeat itself with what happened to homeopathy when, we had the real potential to become the dominant medical paradigm and we lost it. And so we were looking at, do you want to talk about what you were researching?
Yeah, look, I am in the middle of an exploration. My research question is, how are homeopaths educated? And I know what I don't mean, and I'm mostly sure about what I do mean. And therefore, the historical part of what I'm talking about is asking, okay, so we know that the first homeopath in America was Graham in 3, but how did he learn homeopathy? Like, how did he learn it? As an adult, as a non-doctor, we know some skeletal information. He was in Copenhagen. He was getting over a broken heart, and he met a guy called Lund. And Lund had learned homeopathy from Hahnemann. So we know that. Those are the people and the dates and the facts and the sort of sleepy, historical, not so interesting stuff. But I want to know about how information is passed on. Like, how did Lippe learn homeopathy? Okay, he went to the Allentown Academy, but how did he learn it, right? What's the transmission process? I suppose I'm interested in much more in some details about education beyond who graduated on what date and with what qualification and when wearing what frock.
Yeah, because it's so interesting, because when we started to look at this, there are a handful of archives of information about homeopathy. And the one that's right by us in Philadelphia is chock full of educational information because it has everything that transferred down from the medical colleges and the hospital. Not everything from the hospital, but it has all the college information. And so it's really interesting to see, because we can look at the course catalogs, the announcements, who were on the faculty, what were the things that they were focused on and the things that they were arguing about. And I wonder if we sort of work backwards. I want to work backwards a little bit, because let me think about this for a second. Okay, actually, yeah, working backwards a little. So Alastair's asking this question about education and how the transference of information happened, especially in the earlier days. And that will then become, it's a part of this project that we're working on. It's adjacent to this project called Build a Better Homeopath, which is what does it really take to become a homeopath in the 21st century? What are the skills and attributes and the knowledge bases that are required for a person to do this job successfully and safely. And it's ridiculous what's going on out there, because there's been this sort of game of telephone about homeopathy from the early days until now, such that there's very little continuity between what people did. So when I take that, so I was coming at it from that direction. I'm coming at it from a slightly different direction. These things are all kind of overlapping with each other, but part of my current research is about, well, and this is sort of related to my dissertation, it's about germ theory. And I like just keeping germ theory there, because I think that we will soon find that it was a theory and not fact. It doesn't disavow presence of germs, bacteria, viruses, whatever, depending on the point in history that one is talking about this topic, there would be different names, everything from animalcules to molecules to things about miasms and bad air, on through to bacteria, viruses, and so forth.
Yep.
But with that, so with the advances in quote unquote scientific medicine, became bumps in the road for the homeopaths, because homeopathy education was influenced by, it could not be, by the advances in science. And so if you're running a business, right, which these brick and mortar institutions that evolved out of the, mentorship, early homeopathy education, they became schools with adjacent hospitals and equipment and brick and mortar buildings and boards of directors and missions that they had to, they had criteria that they had to meet. And so you come to this place where not only was homeopathy as a philosophical construct affected by the advances in the medical world, but that so was affecting the internal conversations that were happening between those who were delivering the education. And Philadelphia was the hotspot for this, right? So part of the work that I've been doing is looking at, because my time period that I study is basically the 19th century. Well, and then also ancient stuff, but for this particular part of it. And so this 19th century is the time when the evolution of germ theory is happening, and the homeopathy is changing relative to that.
Yep.
And so what I was looking for, and what I continue to look for, is like, how are the courses changing over time? How's the equipment in the hospital or in the college adapting to this? And how are the people looking at and viewing homeopathy versus viewing homeopathy adjacent to the medical practice? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's still essentially educational question, but you're looking at the ways in which our profession evolved, changed, dealt with shifting currents of the age as it was in its, as our profession was in its infancy, and it was,
Which is it's happening now. People are, the homeopaths are just now getting on board with germ theory, as the allopaths are saying, okay, we need to move past it. It's interesting, because one of the things that happened, you'll hear us, if you've listened to lots of these podcasts, we talk about Lippe and Herring and their frenemyship. And so they got into a big fight. I was going to say big row, but I shouldn't use that word, because we're going to talk about the guy called Row. But, Row.
They got into a big handbags.
What is that? What did you say?
Handbags.
Is that like boxing gloves, handbags?
Well, no, it's not boxing gloves. It's what happens when it's like you'd call it weaves. Weaves. It's that story you tell. It's a really interesting story you tell about the.
Nope, not going to tell that story here.
Okay.
Nope. Absolutely not.
It's when two ladies have a fight.
Okay. Oh, and this is not, has nothing to do with me. It's not that I was in a fight. Although I did get pushed by a homeopath once.
Yeah.
But also not a story for today. So you just took me on a different, so this idea, when we go to say, what the hell is homeopathy, right? There are all these different ways that people have attempted to define it. And like I was in a meeting yesterday where the consensus statement that will soon be published, that was put together by a number of stakeholder organizations, including the Institute for the Advancement of Homeopathy, the AIH, the naturopaths, the nurses, NASH. We worked really hard for years now to sort of define homeopathy. And immediately there's a trickle distribution. It will be made widely available soon enough. But right away, people are like coming back with feelings of the desire for inclusivity around any time, any way someone is utilizing a substance that has been prepared in accordance with Hahnemann's dictate. So people are believing that all of that should be included. And I brought up in the meeting yesterday something that I say a lot, which is homeopathy. Well, it's a thing. Yeah. It is a system of medicine that has at its core a philosophical construct. And then it has its therapeutic intervention, so the medicines. And those two things are meant to go together, the philosophy and the therapeutic intervention. When you separate those two things, it's no longer homeopathy. Homeopathy is the combination of both of those. And so when I mentioned that yesterday, I saw a couple of people go like, oh, wait a second, because I think that the emphasis is on the pill.
Well, it's,
right?
You mean the misemphasis?
Well, the emphasis that has been placed, the societal emphasis.
Yeah.
And so with that, it's compelling, because if what we're looking at is that there were problems very early on, in just after Hahnemann's lifetime, within 2 decades, right?
Yeah.
Hahnemann lived from 1755 to 1843, right? So let's say 1848 was the beginning of the college, right? And then in the 1850s is when you get Herring and Lippe, they join in, and they're fighting soon thereafter. And then the whole thing falls apart. By 1880, it's already done because, well, there are a few things. One is that Herring was hell-bent and determined that homeopathy followed the evolving science. That was his idea, right? I don't have all my books out here in my office, but out right by you, you would have the 3rd American edition of the Organon that Herring wrote the introduction to.
Yes.
And what he says in that is, he says, oh, I'm a big proponent of Hahnemann. In fact, you might, say that I'm, like the OG follower, and I'm like Mr. McHahnemann incarnate. However,
my finger and my soul, or something like that.
No, that's in a different thing. He says that's the part about when because Herring had a dissecting wound, was going to lose his finger, and then one of his friends says, oh, take a dose of arsenic. And so he says, not my finger, but the whole man, to the promulgation of homeopathy. I don't think that, maybe it is in the same, it might be in that same place. Anyway, but Herring goes on to say that he basically says, I, like Hahnemann, only believe what I experience. And so basically Herring is an empiricist first, a follower of Hahnemann's doctrine second. Okay. The problem with that is that homeopathy is based on universal laws that don't change. Science and the evolving scientific method, everything that's accepted of its time, that's going to change. Excuse me.
Question.
Thank you. And so Herring hitched his wagon to the contemporary conversation as opposed to the roots of where Hahnemann was coming from. Okay. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I'll just repeat back what I understand. It's that the evolving scientific landscape where new developments are being made every day. He's still an empiricist, an inductive empiricist. And he says, my knowledge is going to be driven by what I observe and what I experience. And therefore, that's before my attachment and commitment to Hahnemann's homeopathy,
Exactly.
which is based on the same principles. But a lot happened after Hahnemann's death in the world of microbiology, right? And
Well,
so all of those developments in battlefield medicine and Pasteur and Koch and Virchow and all of those folks, they came later in Herring's time. And of course, he's got that really expensive telescope.
microscope, $750, the most expensive one of its time. And what did Hahnemann say? Hahnemann wrote to Harry and he said, listen, I know that you're like all into your telescope. Now you got me saying it, your microscope. You're all into your microscope and your autopsies and your, looking at everything for the smallest possible component. However, he says, sit modus in rebus, which is Latin for everything in moderation. Okay. And so what Hahnemann is pushing back, because there are certain things that grow and change, and then there are things that should always be consistent. And so the laws on which homeopathy is premised, the universal laws, those are not changing. Is that the footnote to aphorism 26, I believe. Footnote to 26 or 36. Hold it.
You're talking about the moons of Jupiter.
Yeah. 25, 26. 26. Footnote to aphorism 26. How can luminous Jupiter disappear in the early morning from the optic nerve of the beholder? Jupiter vanishes from sight because the optic nerve is acted upon by a stronger, very similar impinging potence, the brightness of the breaking day. And so Hahnemann is talking about here early on in the Organon about what homeopathy is. It is a simple, elegant principle, which is a stronger, similar cures. And one disease in the body, therefore, the totality of the characteristic symptoms, the externalization, the signs and symptoms of that disease are all one needs in order to find the appropriate remedy to move that person back to health, right? But if you start looking at it through the lens of pathology, which is where the debates started to happen, right?
Rao
Comes on the scene. And so
UE.
RAUE. And so it's interesting because these guys, and you can I have real respect for kind of the questioning, right? Because they are looking at this, they are living through a time when the developments in medicine are huge. They have huge impact. Think about this. This is after their time, the development of antibiotics. If we get to like 1940 with the development of antibiotics, we may now have the perspective of what the overuse of antibiotics looks like and microbial resistance and the downstream effects. But if you were a person who lived through all of the people dying from these acute infectious diseases who are no longer dying from those acute infectious diseases, you're going to be like, antibiotics are like the greatest thing since the mold on sliced bread or the mold on a cantaloupe, as it really was, right? So if that's the case, you could see how these guys they're thinking about this, right? They're investigating. But the problem is, in the same way that the short-term gain from antibiotics, 80 years before we start to see the downstream effects of the overuse of antibiotics or the routine use of antibiotics, right? Which is jumping to vector. You go right into chronic disease without the acute infectious disease principle. And so what was happening in homeopathy at the time of these sort of early divisions that sort of allowed for what has happened today, if you look at somebody like Rao, for example, so Rao was the guy that Herring wanted to be the professor of special pathology. And Lippe is like, we don't need a chair of special pathology, right? We need the externalizations of the signs and symptoms of disease. We need some medical knowledge, but it doesn't have to be as reductionistic. But what happens, and this is what I found to be interesting in looking at all of the course books, announcements and the course books, is what were they teaching every year in the university, right? So if you look at and this is, this is a big part of research, is like, who are people influenced by? Who are they referencing? How are they presenting their material? So Rao, when he writes his pathology book, he's saying that his references included all sorts of people, not just Hahnemann, right? So he's putting Hahnemann on the same level as other influential physicians, be they homeopaths or not. The same happened in, when I went through all the course announcements for all the years of the Hahnemann Medical College, or the Homeopathic Medical College of Pennsylvania and Hahnemann Medical College, both of them. And so what's really interesting is that in the early days, in the late 1848 to like 50, whatever, they didn't even have the organon as a required text. There's no chronic diseases in it. It was medical school with materia medica. So philosophy was...
the decline starts, the rot starts as early as there in the first schools.
Yeah, but then it picked up. So that's when Herring and Lippy come along and they say, no. And there's the one, I didn't pull all of this, but there was the one year, I present this in some of my talks, where they present and say, this is the only place where you are going to find everybody is aligned with the Hahnemannian principles. Never before has this been done. And then it quickly went too far because Herring was going in another direction.
Yeah.
So
I know where you're going with this, but you've not said it yet. So what's the implication of what you're saying around the changing times and the changing science that is impacting Hahnemann's birth child? And why does that matter now? Why does that matter today?
If we look at it, so can I answer it from a sideways thing? I want to do a podcast on sort of how to read the organon, how to understand the organon. One little window, because I was thinking about this. So when you're reading the organon, as when you're reading any historical text, you have to ask the question of the context the person's writing in. To whom are they speaking? Yeah, because people are in dialogue with one another. They're talking about what's happening in the times. And so in homeopathy, aphorism 1, right? The physician's highest and only calling is to return the sick to health. But then you look at the footnote to aphorism 1. And I think this is where everybody goes off the rails. People go off the rails. But when you come at it from the standpoint of a medical historian, you see it for what it is, which is Hahnemann says, and again, I'm using the 6th edition O'Reilly translation just because I like the way that it's organized to use as a textbook. And I know that there are other translations. I use other translations for different research, but this one just for ease. Anyway, the footnote to aphorism 1, he says, the physician's calling is not to spin so-called systems from empty conceits and hypotheses concerning the innervation of the life process and the origins of disease in the invisible interior of the organism, on which so many physicians mongering for fame have hitherto wasted their time and energy. The physician's calling is now to make countless attempts at explanation regarding disease appearances and their proximate cause, okay, which must ever remain concealed, holding forth in unintelligible words or abstract and pompous expressions, da, 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 da. So what he's doing is he's saying here, homeopathy is the system of medicine. And then he goes on to tell us at each and every turn how and why and how to deploy it. And it sits outside of the other paradigms. Now, he also talks about if somebody gets struck by lightning or they need to be resuscitated, of course you're going to do that in extreme measures, right? Sometimes you have to sacrifice the part for the whole. I think Kent says that. And he also says sometimes people are too sensitive for a homeopathic remedy, right? And so you might do moving the energy and so forth, using magnets, a bath, right? But other than those kinds of extremes, what he's saying is, this is a universal law, right? The map of nature has been gifted to us if we work hard enough to understand it and to crack it. And when we work within these parameters that have been defined, we can then execute capital C cure, not just the suppression of or masking of symptoms. So that footnote to aphorism 1, if we take that now back to the conversation of all of the different ways that people are trying to deploy homeopathy, then you have to say that any kind of system beyond what the basic principles are, it's just not homeopathy. It doesn't mean people can't do it. It just means it's not homeopathy. I guess what I'm trying to say is homeopathy deserves its own definition, its own right for what it is. So if somebody is doing a detox protocol, it's not homeopathy. There's no such thing. Isopathy and homeopathy are two different things. Isopathy is using the same to cure same. So anybody who's using a nosode to cure the same disease is not doing homeopathy. Hahnemann says that. I know I say this all the time, but in the footnote to aphorism 56, he says, wanting to cure through an entirely identical disease potence contradicts all healthy common sense and therefore also experience. And he goes on to say that isopathy, he says, there are those who would like to create a third application of medicines against disease through isopathy, as it is called, namely the cure of a present disease with the same miasm. So if you, as a student, are being taught, give morbillinum for measles, tussin for whooping cough, or all of these, you can now buy every single disease from Zika virus on through to whatever starts with an A, right? That's not homeopathy. It's isopathy. It's just not homeopathy. Doesn't mean that you can't do it, but don't call it homeopathy. Hahnemann says there are 3 types of medicine: allopathic medicine, isopathic medicine, and homeopathic medicine. Different. So then what the hell is homeopathy? I think the simplest thing is to use the footnote to aphorism 1 thing. It's not any of these other systems that are described. It is based on the law of similars, right? And it is, in no uncertain terms, giving one remedy at a time and gauging the person's reaction to the remedy.
Do you think that that definition of homeopathy could be translated to, am I enough of a homeopath most of the time? Because what you're essentially saying, let me just describe that to you. Because I'm thinking about it from a different point of view. The point of view I'm coming at the conversation now is the way in which different validated measurement tools are constructed. And so, you create certain standards and then you rate what goes on against those standards. And so let's say that a homeopath is a person that applies similars, uses a single remedy, totality of symptoms, minimum dose, based on the primary sources and, those, and respects and honors the vital force, all of the principles of homeopathy. Now, there's obviously going to be some folks that do all of that all the time, 100%, and therefore could be considered to be homeopaths, right? But every now and again, like you said, do you remember a couple of weeks ago we talked about the lady with the vet and the dog shelter?
Yeah, totally. Even a broken clock is right twice a day.
And so therefore, if you compromise on single remedy 5% of the time, does that still make you a homeopath, right?
Yeah. Or if you every now and again give a totopathic prescription or an isopathic prescription, every now and again, right?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that it's not about absolutes, but it's about how close can you get, or how close are you to Hahnemann's homeopathy? How about that?
Yeah, that's really good because what I think what we're kind of coming to here is that it's been sort of left behind entirely.
Yeah,
and so
your thing. Yeah.
That game of telephone. Oh, you're talking about so I have this slide. I talked about this, I think, in a recent podcast, but I have this slide that I use sometimes where it's a circle with Hahnemann in the middle. And then I have spokes going out. Like, as if Hahnemann's the hub of the wheel, and then spokes going out to all of the great thinkers and teachers who have brought their special sauce to the conversation. And each person is going to be more or less aligned to Hahnemann, right? So I'd put Staff as the closest to Hahnemann. I'd put Benninghausen pretty close, but a little outside, just because of sixth edition issues and whatnot. And same with Stuff, really. But I think Stuff was at the core. And then you go out and then you've got people that are just using the medicines willy-nilly that don't have any connection to Hahnemann whatsoever. Anyway, so picture the hub of the wheel, Hahnemann in the middle, and then spokes going out. And then somebody comes along and they draw a circle around the outside of that, such that anyone who has made any contribution to homeopathy based on opinion or doctrine will be as if equal. So homeopathy in the 21st century has moved generations away from its origin. And the origin is based on universal laws. Everything else is sort of based on fads, outdated science, or the desire to have a good following at a seminar or conference and get people to buy your books.
I love it.
Right?
I think that's the most useful historical description of what's happened so that people can understand that, there are the different schools within homeopathy are because someone's drawn a circle around everything at some point and said,
yeah,
all homeopathy, we're one big church. And in fact, what you're highlighting is that maybe we're not quite such a big church.
Yeah, I don't think we are. And it's really interesting because I think that what has happened is more of like a sociological thing than a medical thing. In other words, people have aligned around the idea of homeopathy as it's like a club that you can join. And by doing so, you're with your people.
Yeah.
I love that part of it. I like to separate from the muggles.
Yeah. And, that idea of tribe, as it's been described, I think is a really, really useful way to express what it has been like historically to be part of the broader homeopathic community, because finding one's tribe is half a life, isn't it? And
I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But now we've gotten to this point, because one of the things that, we didn't have time to talk about, I wanted to just open this door to the what the hell is homeopathy to get us thinking about it, right? But we have to talk about what happens when you go across the pond and you start talking about people like Hughes or Burnett. Burnett an isopath, I think requires a lot of conversation. Yesterday, this meeting that I was in, there was this woman who's like, well, I practice complex homeopathy. Well, what is that? I'm sure that there's a definition for it, but we solve complex problems using Hahnemann's homeopathy all the time. But if somebody is going to take that, and if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, but I believe that this person means that they use protocols of nosodes in order to get people there. What is that? So if somebody is saying, oh, you need to use all these nosodes to build health and to whatever, well, that's fine. Maybe that's true, but it's not a part of the paradigm of homeopathy and universal laws. In fact, I would argue that it's based on an outmoded allopathic assumption or presumption, right? Which it's based on the germ theory of disease, which is actually being walked back. But the homeopaths are running after it with their nosodes, when in reality, we just need to look at the totality of symptoms of the presenting complaint and deal with it methodically. I have one more little thing, but we're running out of time. Can I tell you something that I haven't told you before?
Yeah.
I need one of those Carrie from Homeland whiteboards again, because I've got all these different projects going. But one of them is just, I'm kind of going through and looking at kind of Hahnemann's evolutions over time as I'm working on his discoveries, part of the intellectual history of homeopathy. What have been the discoveries that pushed him forward that go back to this iatrochemical tradition? Anyway, and so I've been looking for this article I've been looking for this piece of Hahnemann's writing, and I don't have the full translation, but it is the introduction that Hahnemann wrote to Benninghausen's book on the antipsorics, right? And so it's quite interesting because
it's in 1832.
It was in 1832.
Yeah.
And so I was curious because I must have heard something about it. I don't know, but I was like, I need to see what this is. Oh, I know why it was, because people are always asking for a list of the anti-psoric or anti-miasmatic remedies. And I thought, well, Bunninghausen with that repertory would be the place to start. Anyway, so Hahnemann's introduction, it's like a whole article that he wrote about posology. So this is before he got to 6th edition, 50 millesimal repetition. So he's in between the 5th and 6th editions in his thinking.
Yep.
He's in between the 5th and 6th editions, and he's recognizing that rote prescribing does not work. And so he wrote this introduction, is the translation is on the repetition of the dose of a homeopathic remedy. And so I just thought that in closing, this idea of what the hell is homeopathy, right? And talking about the system of medicine that it is, part of what people think is homeopathy is to give multiple remedies stacked together in these protocols or whatever. And Hahnemann he's saying you give one, so this is in this article, his central argument is basically he's arguing against two extremes. On one hand, there are people who are repeating a remedy mechanically at fixed intervals. And then there are people who refuse to repeat a remedy when repetition is needed, which we would now call that sort of Kentian, give a dose and wait 10 years. But he's saying that the only way to judge is to observe the patient's response carefully and decide on the next step based on the action of the remedy. And of course, the only way that you can do that is if you're only giving one remedy, because if you were giving more than one remedy, it's impossible to understand the effect. So I guess in closing, and the what the hell is homeopathy, single remedy, Hahnemann reinforces it over and over and over and over again. I mean, we have dozens upon dozens of references going up to his last moments, even though there are a couple people who have sort of rejiggered that. Okay. So we need to stop, but we didn't read the listener comments. We'll have to save those because we have another meeting. I'll just close with our Homeopathy Help Now story. Someone wrote in and said, after reading every book in the library about homeopathy, I wanted nothing more than to incorporate it into my life. Anyone seeking homeopathic care for the healing of mind, body, soul will feel dismayed by the cost associated with treatment, which is not covered by insurance. Homeopaths are absolutely worth the prices they charge, but this causes them to be out of reach to many people. The Care Grant program, this is our Care Grant program through Homeopathy Help Now, allows a person like me who fell ill years ago due to overwhelming hardship and unable to work very many hours for income to have access to homeopathic care and attempt to regain health. I believe it is possible that homeopathy will restore my health and energy levels and enable me to work more so that I can pay it forward for a future Care Grant recipient and afford to continue receiving care from my student homeopath when she completes schooling. This program gives me great hope, and I am honored and grateful to have been selected as a Care Grant recipient. Thank you. Does that not make your day?
That makes my day. What would also make our day is smash the like and subscribe buttons, ring the bell, ding the dong,
ding, ding, ding.
all of that stuff.
All right, everybody.
See you, folks.
See ya. Thanks for listening.
Take care. Ciao.
AHE is changing the face of homeopathy education by raising the bar through rigorous academics and unparalleled clinical training delivered live through the soulful use of cutting-edge technology. AHE prepares its students to become fully rounded homeopathic practitioners from anywhere in the world. Apply today at ahe.online.